Welcome back to Curious City, the podcast from Glasgow Life Museums. I'm David Scott, and this is how it works. In each episode, we head out into locations and museums around Glasgow, making connections and discovering the stories that surround us. For our episode today, we're taking a look at food in the city. We'll be looking at food that features in our museums, at food culture here in Glasgow, as well as further afield, and we'll be hearing about how a restaurant kitchen has recently been the inspiration for a local musician. To help us explore today, we're very pleased to be joined by chef and television presenter Julie Lin. Since Julie's appearance on MasterChef in 2014, she's become one of the best known chefs in the city. Julie, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Julie?
Of course, yeah. So I started off life as a chef in this cooking career. So that was about 10 years ago now, in 2014. And I just loved cooking for friends and for family. So I decided to enter myself into MasterChef when I was only 22. I think I thought I was a lot older and wiser than I was at the time, and managed to get through to just before the quarterfinals. And that really kick-started my career. I ended up leaving my job in retail, and I used to teach violin and piano on the side. And then I entered a kitchen with Laurie McMillan, who is now the owner of Cafe Strangebrew in the south side of Glasgow. And she taught me everything I know. I went into the kitchen not knowing very much at all, but just said, listen, I'll come in, and if I'm rubbish, you can kick me out. And if it goes well, you can keep me in. So it all started with her. And I kind of slowly built it up, actually learned a bit more experience as to how to work in a professional kitchen, and then opened up my first street food stall, which was called Julie's Street Kitchen. And that was down a lane on Gordon Lane in Glasgow. And it all kind of spun on from there. So from street food stalls, we did events, we did catering for weddings, all of the above, and then that resulted in Julie's Kopitiam opening in 2017. That was a lot more of a success than I ever thought it was going to be, because you always open these things thinking, like, is anyone actually going to come? Is it going to be successful? And luckily it really did. It went down well within the neighbourhood, so it was just like a small 15-seater, maybe 16 seats if we were all cramped in like sardines in that space. And then we obviously kind of graduated, went to SWG3, had a semi-permanent restaurant there, and then on to Gaga Kitchen and Bar, which is where I've got now. Closed down the Kopitiam because that was a bit too small for what we needed, and we're just in Gaga now in Partick.
Julie, can you tell us about where that love of food started, pre-MasterChef?
I mean, I've loved eating since I was a young child. My mum's always been big around food because she is from Malaysia, and quite similarly to how you get that love of food in Italy and that passion for it, you get the exact same passion in Malaysia, and everyone is so ferociously, like, they guard their food, they know exactly what they want, they will travel miles to get the perfect noodle dish. So it's really all come from her. And when I left school, I realised that I couldn't quite cook as well as my mum, so I was missing like the food that she would cook all the time. So went back to her and learned a bit more. And then it just became a kind of daily passion, and I always believe like it's quite nice to have a passion that you can exercise every day. So, and this one you can do at least 3 times a day if you're lucky. So yeah, so I really like to cook at least every day, just to kind of keep that passion. So that's where it's all come from.
Your mum's been this big influence. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe other influences that have come into play?
Yeah, my mum would she would have about 9 or 10 guests over for dinner pretty much every Friday, and she would just kind of produce this spread of food. Now, in our culture, which is Nonya culture, and that means you're Malay Chinese. So if you're male and you're Malay Chinese, you're Baba, and if you're female, you're Nonya. So there's a whole subculture of food called Baba Nonya cuisine, and that's like very particular. There's a bit more chili in it. It's got Malay influence, Indian influence in there. There's loads of spices. So she would cook a big Nonya spread, so you wouldn't have things like starters, mains and desserts. You would always come into a big spread, and that's, I think, the kind of socialising around food is where I picked that up from, because for me, you communicate like your love through food. So it's always been like a big way for me to communicate how I'm feeling. If you cook for your friends, you love them, kind of thing. So yeah, I really got that from her. And then growing up in Glasgow, my mum came over here in the 70s to become a health visitor. So she moved to Leeds first, and then she moved to Glasgow, and she just loved Glasgow. I think she really just kind of nestled herself into the communities there and adored every minute of it. So I really think actually there's a lot to owe the inspiration to the Asian community that was already nestled within Glasgow. At that point, there was quite a large community of Asian people in Garnet Hill. And there used to be a couple of community centres there as well. So my mum, we used to go to the park there all the time. And I think really that acceptance of being in Glasgow and you do have a huge Asian community really kind of like invites you to cook the food and explore the food with other people.
Thank you. I mean, that's a good link into the next question I had, just talking about Glasgow and, you know, what's the scene like in the city?
Glasgow over the last, I would say 10 plus years, really had like a bit of a food resurgence. Everyone has been jumping into kind of independent businesses. There's been a real focus on local food as well, because we have such a huge larder in Scotland that's just incredible for cooking. Probably one of the best in the world. Yeah, I think within Glasgow there's been a big surge in restaurants from different ethnic backgrounds as well. In Partick, where Gaga is, there's just rows and rows of like amazing Asian supermarkets. There's a lovely place called Ai San Thai, which I get all of my herbs from. And you walk in and it's got all the incense burning like you do in shops in Malaysia. So it gives you that real like nostalgic feel. And a lovely place called iMart as well, which for me looks like a Wes Anderson shot of an Asian supermarket is the best way I can describe it. Everything's like perfectly rolled up. So with these supermarkets, there's also a big Asian student community. So, and I think that Dumbarton Road's got a really kind of lovely centrepiece in Glasgow for opening it up to Asian cuisine, especially in the south side of Glasgow where the Burrell Collection is. There's been a huge amount of kind of independent people opening up their restaurants and cafes. It's been really nice to see the kind of bravery, because it takes a lot of bravery to open up businesses, and you're seeing like a big kind of young movement of people. You started touching on it there, but favourite places in the city? I've got some old favourites, which I'm going to start with because I think that sometimes they don't get enough love. One of my most favourite places in the entire city to go to is Jack and Ellie Cafe in Maryhill, because I used to go there when I was wee and it reminds me of growing up. I also love going to places like Mother India, Crab Shack, which was kind of old favourite ones. And then for newer places to go to, I absolutely love, there's so many places in the south side actually. So I love going to Big Counter. I think that's got a really like lovely focus on the kind of produce that they have, and it's really simple, but oh, it's so satisfying. I could go there every night. And then actually one place that has been there forever actually that I go to, I think it's the restaurant I go to the very most in Glasgow. I think it has to be this place for the frequency that I go there. The Chinatown restaurant. And they do amazing dim sum. So you have to go, dim sum is like something that you eat during the day in Asia. It's not like a nighttime thing. So actually going there during the day between their kind of 12 to 5 point is when you get all of the kind of specialised dim sum pieces that you actually don't get after 5:30. There's my top tip for you. Thank you. I am taking note. Julie, before we head out into Burrell, can you tell us, are you someone who likes a museum? I love a museum. I think it's one of the most peaceful places in the world. And I think when you've got a busy life in a city, it can be really nice to just simply walk around a museum and just sit and look at the thing, take in the things that you want, like the colours and any kind of tapestries that you see, which I really love about the Burrell Collection. I was here, it was about a year ago, and I just spent hours here. And I looked, I think I had a first tour, which was to look at all the things inside of the building. And then the second tour was to just go around and look out the window, because it's such a beautiful building in itself that I think that that's part of the visual kind of appeal for here. So one of my favourite things to do, and yeah, often go to Kelvin Grove Museum on a Sunday to hear the organ play as well. I think that's really lovely. And it's some of these activities that actually quite a lot of Glaswegians that have lived here all their lives don't know about, the kind of church organ on a Sunday in Kelvin Grove, and I think it's one of those things that we should be very proud of. So I've spent a lot of time in them. Okay, so Burrell felt like a good place to start for this episode. You can see a lot of food in the collection here. It's in our still life paintings, our tapestries, as Julie mentioned, and our sculptures. To help us start exploring, last week we met up with two of our curators, Ed and Laura, to find out about some of their favourite food objects here.
So Ed, you're a curator of medieval and Renaissance art. If you were to have a dinner party and to use one object from your collection at that party, what would you use and why?
I think for me, it would have to be the set of 12 wooden trenchers or roundels that we've got. So they come to us from Elizabethan England, so we're talking late 1500s. They're a very thin circular piece of wood They measure about 12.5 centimetres in diameter, sort of like an oversized coaster. And they'd have been used as a plate for a rather elaborate dessert course known as a banquet, which was this exclusive after-dinner event held by the rich elite in the late 16th and early 17th century. So after a feast, a select and notable guest might be invited by the host to retire to a different room or even a separate banqueting house, where they'd be invited to partake in this fantastical and colourful buffet of sweetmeats, sugared fruits, candied nuts, wafers, marzipans and other sorts of sweet delights. So delicious,
It
right?
sounds like a Willy Wonka feast.
Exactly that, right? And so at this time, sugar was still a really expensive commodity. So by offering up this spread, you were really making a show of your wealth and prestige. And the banquet really was a show. So it would incorporate theatrical displays of sugar and these sculptures called subtleties, though nothing subtle about them. Yeah. And they'd be moulded into an array of different shapes like castles, cathedrals, animals, chessboards, complete with pieces.
Wow.
You get sugar illusions as well, so you would perhaps find bacon and eggs that have been made out of sugar, things like that. And even the crockery itself could be smashed and eaten at the end of the banquet.
Wow.
So as I say, trenchers like these, they would have been used as plates at these events. So treats would be consumed from this plain, unpainted side, and then it get turned over. And when you turn it over, you reveal this rather beautifully painted surface, which is decorated with various stylized flowers and fruits. And then they surround a little poem or posy in the middle. Now, sometimes they're quite moralizing or biblical, but in our case, for our examples, they are meant to be sort of amusing and intended to be read aloud and sort of stir a little bit of mirth and laughter. So they have these really tongue-in-cheek posies about marriage and relationships and things like that. I suppose in many ways you can see them as sort of the something akin to the modern Christmas cracker or fortune cookie, something like that.
So do you know any of those wee poems off by heart?
I do.
All right.
They're a bit cheeky, not sure. Okay, so if thou be young, then marry not yet. If thou be old, thou hast more wit. For young men's wives will not be taught, and old men's wives are good for naught.
How rude!
Yeah,
How rude! You can imagine people at the table would have found that very hysterical.
Yes,
especially
absolutely.
if you got something that kind of almost related to your life.
Exactly.
It would be a little bit,
Exactly
you know,
that.
oh, 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 ha, ha, ha. Much better than a Christmas cracker joke.
So what about you, Laura? You're the creator of decorative art. You cover sort of Georgian period material. Is there anything from the Georgian dining collection that you would use?
Yeah, so all this talk of sugar has fired up my sweet tooth, and I think I would take the beautiful silver hot chocolate pot that we have,
Good choice, yep.
18th century. Chocolate was introduced into our diets in the 17th and 18th century, but not in the chocolate bar form that we all know and love, and for me, indulge too much in. But instead it came as that hot chocolate drink. And it comes from cocoa beans, which at that time were only grown in South America. And the Aztecs and Mayans for years had been creating a drink out of the hot chocolate. But it wasn't until the 16th century, when the Spanish came over and colonised that area, did they discover the cocoa bean and this drink. And they discovered that if you flavoured it with sugar and spices, it would make this beautiful hot beverage. And it really took off when they took it back to Europe, all the way across Spain, Italy, France, and eventually to Britain. Now, we have our hot chocolate. Well, I don't know how you have your hot chocolate, but I have mine with milk.
Absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely. Fry up milk. But in the 18th century, the mixture was a little bit different. Once you had ground up the cocoa bean and then grated it into your hot chocolate mixture, that mixture usually had a basis of egg yolks. Not sure about that. Then you'd have flavours like aniseed and cinnamon, so quite kind of pungent, sharp flavourings in there. And the majority of the mixture wasn't milk. Instead, it was alcohol, probably a red wine or a port. And the thing that makes me laugh about the hot chocolate recipe in the 18th century is that if you were wealthy enough to afford hot chocolate and to have it in your home and to have it in a beautiful silver pot like the one we have in the collection, you would actually have it for breakfast. So that's certainly starting early in the morning. And a really intoxicating drink in more ways than one, I assume. So yeah, and it was quite a gloopy, viscous mixture. If you imagine all that egg yolk and, chocolate, and it had to be frothed up constantly. So you find on the chocolate pots, there's actually little holes on the top that you could stick in a stirring stick so you could froth it up and be your own 18th century barista.
Okay. Well, the combinations there don't exactly strike me as delicious,
Nah.
but you have got me in the mood for a hot chocolate. And I see the cafe's open.
Oh yeah,
Interested?
Let's go, but let's ask for it with marshmallows, not alcohol.
It was so interesting hearing about how attitudes towards food and ingredient have changed from Ed and Laura there. I mean, you've talked a little bit about tradition, but what is the key role that tradition plays in the food that you create?
That's a really good question. I think it's so important to honour tradition within cooking because that's essentially how we identify some of our culture habits, actually. And the one thing that I would say is that I think if we move our language around the word authentic to traditional, so I would rather call my food, if I've got a traditional Malaysian dish, I would never call it authentic here because we're not within Malaysia, we're not within the heat, we're in a different climate with different ingredients. So I'll maybe use Scottish prawns rather than Malaysian prawns. And these things make a flavour difference. So whenever I talk about the food, I say like we're honouring traditions, but to actually embrace the inauthentic kind of style of cooking, because that opens up a whole new cuisine that we can have of mixed ingredients with the kind of similar techniques and spices of Malaysia.
Julie, we've talked about Glasgow and Malaysia. Where else do your favourite foods come from?
Oh, I actually really love going to Spain for food. I think they've got such a lovely food culture there. So I was lucky enough to visit a place called Jerez, which is where sherry is made from, so it just means sherry. And they've got, oh my goodness, I could have spent weeks there. They've got a lovely dish and it's called tortillas de camarons. Apologies if I'm absolutely butchering that pronunciation, but it's a really nice prawn fritter. And it's almost like it's like a flat disc and they fry it in a certain way so it becomes super crispy and it's got big hunks of prawn in there. It's just absolutely delicious. They've got like a real focus on fried fish there. But then they also have, I guess, of course, the sherry as well, but a lovely kind of culture around. They've got a churro stall in the middle of Jerez where they've got a nice, I'll never forget this, it's one of my favourite food memories. There's 2 churro stands and they don't really compete each other. Everyone has their favourite, but they're both still busy. Rather than creating the chocolate that you dip into the churros themselves, they leave that to the businesses for the cafes round about it. So you buy your churros, buy a bag of hot, fresh churros from them, and then go to one of the cafes, get that like melted, really rich, dark chocolate, not hot chocolate, but a dark melted chocolate. And you just see the whole kind of centre thrive. So I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, you definitely could make your own chocolate sauce, but it's nice that everyone feeds off each other. So I think there's like a big emphasis on food community in Jerez. So I love to go there for my travels and try the occasional sherry.
Julie, thank you. Before we head into our final piece this week, let's take a look back over where we've been. We started off here at Burrell with chef Julie Lin. We found out about some delicious desserts with Laura and Ed. Next, we're back at Burrell and we're going to be jumping behind the scenes for our next piece, heading into the restaurant's kitchen. We recently commissioned a number of series of musical works and soundscapes that were inspired by Burrell and Pollock Park. Bryony's just met up with one of the musicians who was involved to find out why he chose to build his soundscape from the sounds of the kitchen.
So first, would you like to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you do?
Hi, my name is Chizu. I'm a musician and a moving image artist. I make films predominantly using archive material and found footage. I make music that's kind of built in fragments.
Why did you decide to use sound from the kitchens as part of your soundscape?
So I was interested in quite a few different things. And when it came to the kitchen, I wanted to kind of go beyond being inside of the cafe itself. So I wanted to capture some like hustle and bustle of like operational sounds, like a coffee machine steamer like being turned on and off, and like chefs kind of being like, like backs, hot, plates. So that was kind of like the intention going into it. In reality, it was kind of different. I've worked in a kitchen, well, a couple of kitchens, And totally forgot that when you're actually like working in the kitchen, like you have the radio like blaring, and there's also like not really that much chat, like when you've just sort of like come off of like a really sort of busy lunch or dinner rush. You're kind of like really sweaty and tired, and you're just kind of like processing a bit of what what happened over the last like 2 or 3 hours. So yeah, I was in the kitchen just trying to be a bit of a fly on the wall, but it was like really quite tight, and it was hot, and there was like a lot of music going, and like it was a lot of dishwasher sounds. I think at the time it was Ben and Ewan were in, and they kind of just like made me feel like really quite comfortable with like, you know, being an intrusive person in the kitchen. Because I know when I work in the kitchen, and someone was like, oh, there's some like artist coming in to like, I don't know, record something, I'd be like, oh my god, who is this? Oh, fine, whatever, just let them in. But they were like really sound about it, and they kind of just like let me do my thing, and they were kind of like, so what's this for again? Like, who are you? What do you do?
Did it make you see the museum or the collection differently at all?
I think because my experience of that day was quite specific to the way that I previously saw the Burrell more broadly. I think normally when I'm here, I'm like outside for quite a long time. Probably come in, get a coffee, and like walk around and do like a bit of a loop. But I think because when I came to record, it was just before a lunch rush, so I had to wait like a good while for things to like settle back down. So I was kind of just in the restaurant, just like listening, and then I don't know, it felt like, you know, kind of being granted entry to like behind the scenes of things. So I felt very much like a listener, an observer, I guess like a punter, like just sort of kicking about. And then I guess like being inside of the kitchen was, I don't know, just like crossing that kind of threshold, like when you visit a space and you get to go into like the kind of like secret bit or like the underground bit. In any, I don't know, chef-based, kitchen-based like drama, there's a kind of like swinging doors that like is just like a completely like different energy. So I had an expectation that there would be like quite a stark difference as well, but it was pretty chill.
That's it for our food-themed episode of Curious City. Huge thanks to Julie Lin for being our curious guest and joining us here at Burrell. See you next time on Curious City.